This is the Michael Bryan Show. Hi everyone, welcome back to the show, and I am joined with Lisa Rusyniak, who is the CEO and President of Goodwill Industries. So we're talking about thrift stores, but we're talking about the bigger mission that the company has. So Lisa, thanks so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So I thought we'd start a little bit about you, if that's okay. How did you get started? Why did you choose to get involved with Goodwill?
Well, many years ago, about 28 years ago, I was working for a market research company and I was just manipulating numbers and analyzing data for companies that were looking at customer traffic, and it was so boring. I was on a board of an organization that helps people with developmental disabilities. And I was having dinner with the executive one night, and she mentioned that Goodwill had an opening doing marketing. So I threw my hat in the ring, and I started here overseeing all of the workforce programs that we have, all of our training, and then gradually moved into vice president role.
So why is thrifting so important? Is it that there's some benefits to it? Why should people start thrifting and go into thrift stores more?
Yeah, so I think, in the last few years, we've seen such an increase in the amount of fast fashion clothing that's, entering the marketplace. And by fast fashion, I mean, typically it's very trendy, usually made with polyester and nylon fabrics, which are, not very washable, first of all. So, you get a snag or something in it, or you get a stain in it, and it just becomes unwearable. So we wind up throwing it away. And so that means that it winds up in a landfill somewhere. And we're trying to stop that. And we, would like people to come and repurpose what somebody else has donated, which typically means higher quality and longer life. So not a lot of polyester, not a lot of that nylon, but more cottony fabrics that will have a longer lifespan, because it really does wind up creating a lot of waste with these low cost to produce fabrics that just wind up in all these trendy clothes that just won't last more than a season.
That's something I've never really thought about, this idea of, when people think of consumerism and people just buying something new rather than fixing something or, that sort of thing. There's like an edge towards lower quality. If something breaks, you get another one. I never quite thought of it that way in terms of clothing because I always assumed that the clothing would last longer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, part of the problem is that, that the cheaper clothing just does not last. And so you're, looking at maybe getting a season or maybe a year's worth, and then it's a throwaway, which really creates a lot of waste. And that particular material cannot be recycled. There is a market for polyester, but it's very costly for the equipment to remanufacture textiles with polyester. So there are very few companies are doing that right now. There is a couple that we visited last year in Germany and in France that have this equipment, but it's very, very expensive. On the other hand, when you purchase a cotton item, it can be repurposed. So even if you wear it and it gets holes and tears and rips, there is a recycling market for that to be repurposed in the manufacture of new goods, because there's a quality component to it that can be, repurposed. And in the United States and California, in fact, there is a law making sure that manufacturers do use a percentage of recycled material in their newly manufactured clothing. And we're going to see that probably become more prevalent because we really need to think about what we're doing with all the waste downstream. So we're pretty excited about, being part of this you know, new kind of thinking of repurposing and really building sustainable pathways for items that we use every day. In our Goodwill, we also last year have begun recycling glass. So we get a lot of glassware, glasses, picture frames, vases, that kind of stuff that are made of glass that we don't sell in the store. And so when they don't sell, and it's really hard to transport to another facility to be resold, like in an outlet, for example. So we bought a machine that's a pulverizer that takes glass and breaks it up into tiny particles, and it goes through this pulverizing system, and it creates sand and cullet, which again, that can be repurposed. So we're using the sand in selling it to construction companies that are using it for roadways, also building materials, et cetera. And so wherever we can find pathways that we can take things that are donated to us and find more purposes for them, to keep them out of landfills, to keep them from going into the waste stream, the better.
Wow, I didn't realize you could turn glass back into sand again. That's incredible. That's really fascinating.
Yeah.
What's the process for cotton? Let's say you decide, okay, I've got something that's cotton, I've got a tear in it, I've got a rip in it, I can't really wear this anymore. That then gets thrown away or put in a clothing recycling plant. What happens then? How does it become something else?
So traditionally, in Goodwill, when you donate to Goodwill, we um, have processors that look at each and every item to determine whether it's resellable. So in our stores, we don't sell things with rips, tears, holes, but we do sell it for salvage. And 70% of the salvage that we sell, which is again things with holes and rips and tears, gets repurposed and made into rags. And a lot of that's done offshore, outside the United States. But there are rags made that are used in all kinds of janitorial, automotive, all kind of industries. And so we repurpose our salvage that way, with our salvage vendors. And so I think that's how most secondhand stores do that. And it really does create another life for things that, even though it does, have a rip or tear or a stain in it, it can be repurposed and made into something new, such as rags. And then some of the stuff that we don't sell in the store, that's, good quality stuff, we send to an outlet, where we sell everything by the pound. And then if it doesn't sell there, then also it goes into salvage. But in salvage, folks may go through and pull out the good pieces, and then they will sell in countries that need those items for clothing. So, for example, short sleeve shirts, a lot of stuff goes to Africa, shoes, all those kinds of things for warm weather. They'll pull them out, and there's a market for that also in other countries. So it really is, providing low cost goods to the public, when they're donated in our store. And then, of course, when we sell it in the outlet, and then, of course, it has another life in salvage. I have seen the equipment that does break down the material. There are not many companies in the United States that do that right now, but it's coming. Definitely a lot more discussion in this industry, about how we can, bring the technology to the United States, because it does exist more so in Europe. Another thing that we're looking at right now is how to repurpose plastic. So you may recall, when you were little, you had, I think they called them big wheels, but there are these little, very hard, rigid plastic little buggies that you could drive, little kids drive around the neighborhood. And once you're done with them, it really is trash. Or if it hasn't been worn down completely, you may choose to donate it to a charity. And so if it doesn't sell in our stores, then we're looking at having a machine that breaks it down and can shred the plastic, and then it can be repurposed in the manufacture of other plastic items. So, for example, home improvement stores, they sell those buckets. You need buckets for painting, buckets for everything. There are companies that will take recycled plastic and, remanufacture with using that material and making new things. There's lots of discussion about all the different kinds of things that for decades we've just been a throwaway society, and now we're looking at things, alternatives that make sense for the environment.
I'd be curious about what things were like before all of this, because you mentioned technology, and I get that when things would progress or things would evolve, then hopefully we find a way of breaking lots of different things down and then be able to reuse those. But what were things like before the technology came around? Because thrifting's been around for a while, I imagine.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thrifting's been around forever. In Baltimore, we are coming up on 100 and let's say 110 years in Baltimore. But it used to be that people held on to things for a lot longer because they were better quality. And people didn't have a lot of money to go buy a new outfit for every new occasion. And I think that times have changed and economies have changed. And so and because it's become so cheap, it's okay that you can go afford to buy a new outfit, because the items are so cheap because they're cheaply made. But then, you have this problem of, what do you do with it when you're done with it? So I think that the coming of technology and producing textiles and, different items is very different from, let's say, 1950s when things were made much more durable, I think, back then. That's just my opinion.
Do you ever find that eventually it will be a lean towards quality and this idea of repurposing and recycling? We see it a lot more with paper and plastics and cardboard, but do you think this is a step in the right direction, or do you think a lot of people will keep doing what they're doing because we found a way of recycling, let's say, polyester clothing as well?
Yeah, I think it's completely fabulous that we're going in this direction. And I think it's going to keep getting better, that we're going to be finding more ways to recycle things. And part of it is that we need to do a better job of educating people because a lot of people don't know. So for Goodwill, our revenue comes from our stores. So after we pay, our electric bill, we pay our employees, all the proceeds go to fund our mission. And our mission isn't in retail. That's just a mechanism for funding our mission. Our mission is to help people get jobs and training. And in fact, last year we opened an adult high school for those who may have dropped out. So our mission really is what is meaningful, I think, to people when they hear about what we're doing with the funds when they shop in our stores, that we're using it actually for programs to get people out of poverty, and to get them trained for people who are coming out of the prison system, for example, people who are coming off of public assistance, or maybe just have been dislocated or haven't worked in a while. We're retraining them, and helping them, get case management services. So if they need housing, if they need substance abuse services, um, and daycare, transportation, we have case managers that will help our participants access all of those resources, and then go into one of our training programs, where they'll get a certification. It could be in the medical field for a certified nursing assistant or geriatric nursing assistant, the building trades, culinary. We do a pharmacy technician training program. We do a flagger program for the highway administration. So there are lots of different certifications they can get. And then, of course, if they did drop out of high school, we have a 2-year accelerated high school diploma school. And it's just like, going back to high school. We have all the credits that they would need that meet the state's standards, and they can graduate with their high school diploma plus a certification. And then we have folks that will help them get jobs and, ultimately get back on their feet. And if they want to go to college, we'll help them do that as well. Figure out how to get loans and how to get assistance and grants. So I think part of it is we have to do a lot better job of educating about our mission. And that would probably give people a lot more incentive and remind them, hey, I should give to Goodwill or give to this charity because they're doing something meaningful with the revenue that's generated from their stores.
I'm sure that would make a huge difference as well, especially in an age where everyone's sharing about the behind the scenes, I guess, that when you think of companies using social media, possibly even more traditional media as well, there seems to be a big lean towards, well, it's not just a company, it's not just a shop, it's not just a whatever it is, there is something else going on. So if someone was to donate to Goodwill or someone was to go down this road, what's the ripple effect of that? What is the effect of their donation to Goodwill and to you guys?
Yeah, yeah, and we're all about giving people a second chance. If they made the wrong decision at some point and just got off track, our mission is to help them get back on track and help them get their independence back.
So when you think of the area that you want to focus on, so let's say it's education, or you mentioned giving people a chance to find another job or possibly retrain, that sort of thing. How do you then go about making that a reality? Is it just a case of using the finances to build it, or is there a bit more going on?
No, so we create programs based on, what is going on in our labor market. So for example, we know that healthcare has huge turnover, especially for entry level positions. And so we created the programs to meet the needs of the labor market. So we're meeting the needs of the community and the labor market. So um, there's a real partnership there. And so we build programs based on what the needs are. Just like in construction, also, there's been so much construction in recent years and nobody to do the work. And so we built a program and partnered with other folks that do the skills training that will make them certified and able to get into those sectors that need those people. But it's really tough, because sometimes you have to have honest discussions with people. You may not be able to be a rocket scientist, but we can get you a starting place here and build a map for you for how you want to get there. So you have a career goal, and once you go through like the basics, we'll help you get to the next level because we want to work in industries that have career ladders, so people can be promoted and move up, and their wages can be elevated as well as they go. And we want to be able to track that. So when we can show their economic value of goodwill by saying, we're helping people pay income tax. So they're putting money into the economy and we're saving the government on, whatever they were on public assistance, for example, or they were incarcerated. We know what the costs are for the state and the government to fund them. So when we evaluate our programs, we're looking at long-term success of our participants, where we can demonstrate that there's a financial mobility component, and then of course in industries that have a lot of openings in that entry level rung, where they can move up.
I'd be curious about how you go about starting, let's say the school as an example, because I guess you're not able to educate them yourself, Lisa. So how do you source the educators and things like that?
So our school is actually run by Goodwill. Our school is overseen by the government, so all of our curriculum has to be approved by the education department, and all of our teachers are recruited that work for Goodwill, mostly who were handpicked because they're training, they're teaching adult learners, which is very, very different from, school age children. And so we have 20 instructors on staff that are just fabulous, who are accustomed to working with people with a lot of barriers to employment. So they may have, criminal records and lots and lots and lots of issues. And so we're there to help them get through those issues, help them deal with them, and then help them go to class, during the day. And we have classes at night as well if they have a job during the day, because most people can't just, quit life and go back to school. They have, families and children and et cetera. So our schedules are built around the individual's life and very flexible. But all the teachers work for Goodwill. And we're in our second year. We just had our second graduation. We had 82 graduates last week at our graduation. So we're very, very proud of it. And in fact, the school took us a long time because in our state, there was no legislation around adult high schools. And so we worked for 10 years just to get the legislation through. And then we had to work another, I guess it was about 3 years to get some funding put aside for it, because the school is pretty expensive to run. We can't fund it ourselves. So we were able to get some grants and some funds from the government to get it off the ground. But of course, it's going to have to, be run by Goodwill eventually. Not rely on any government subsidy eventually, because government funds are always so tenuous. You just don't know what priorities the government's going to, take on. So we always want to try and self-fund our programs so we don't have to rely on outside funds and resources.
How does it feel for you to be able to do that? Is education something that's close to you, Lisa? Is it something that's, I guess, of interest to you, or is it purely a company thing, like a company mission that it's important to them?
No, and it's a really personal thing for me. My grandfather dropped out of high school. My grandmother dropped out of high school. Both of them dropped out because, my grandfather had siblings that were living in shelter. So he got a job and to get them out. And my grandmother also did the same thing. They had a lot of siblings and parents, my great grandparents were having problems making ends meet. And so they just all got jobs to go to support their family. And so I think I think the only way in this day and age for people to get out of poverty is with a high school education. And so having, grown up with, knowing that my family had to drop out, and so really never got above kind of a lower middle class, it means a lot to me to help people for whatever reason, whether they have a disability or they dropped out of high school. They deserve a chance to go back, and we're here for them to, get those resources to get a high school education, to get training, to get a job, and to move up in that so that they actually have a career, not just go get a job at a fast food place. We want them to get a job where it's meaningful employment, where there's a path, and there's lots of room for growth and opportunity.
I'd be curious about what's your take on someone's ability to retrain and build a career, because I picture a situation where you're struggling with whatever it is. It could be you just got out of prison, you're trying to essentially get yourself back on track or get on your feet, or you're hunting for this second chance or even a third chance. What can they do? What kind of things would help them become a little bit more, I guess, appealing to employers? How could someone do that? Because I'd imagine it being quite difficult to find a career or a job anyway. How could people tip things in their favor?
So I think, finding an organization like Goodwill would be ideal. We don't have to do any advertising in Baltimore because we have that many people that just hear about us word of mouth. And we have a program where we go behind the fence. We go inside the prison. And for people who are getting ready to be released, we do job readiness training with them. So we help them try to get their resume together and teach them how to interview. If they have certain offenses are expungible, meaning they can come off of your record. And we have a legal aid organization that comes on our site once a month and will help folks get those kinds of offenses expunged from their records. So they don't come up when they're doing a job search. But there are lots and lots of resources out there, and people just don't know about them. And so that's why it's incumbent on organizations like Goodwill to make sure that people know about us, make sure we're going in the prison system, make sure that we're listed as a resource for folks who may need our services.
I guess in some ways that kind of makes it a level playing field, doesn't it? If someone's able to have those sorts of things removed, then it's almost like you're the same on paper in a lot of ways compared to someone that wasn't in that situation. But
Exactly.
what if they can't get it expunged? Then what other opportunities are out there?
Well, there are a lot of employers that have become more ex-offender friendly over the years because I think there's just been such a demand for labor that employers have had to reconsider hiring people with, criminal records or disabilities or what have you, because the labor has just not been there for them. And so, they may exclude some offenses, but I think employers by and large are much more amenable to hiring people with a criminal background than they were, say, 10 years ago.
What are some of the things that people typically get wrong? So whether it's to do with their thoughts on clothing and donating, or possibly some myths around this idea of, okay, well, if you have this issue, whether it's a disability or whether you just come out of prison, I imagine some people would think that their life could essentially never get back on track, and that may or may not be true. What are some other things that are not true when it comes to the way that Goodwill works and some of the things that we've spoken about? Let's bust some of these myths, Lisa. What do people get wrong?
In the United States, there are 153 individual Goodwill organizations. So we're all separate entities with separate boards. And we were created that way because we are very community centric. So in Baltimore, we're very urban. In Western Maryland, it's very rural. And so the needs of the communities are very different. And so I think a lot of people think that there's just, it's one big ginormous, corporation, when in fact it's not. And there are so many of us, and we're all here doing different things. We all do retail stores and we all do workforce development, but it may look very differently. And some of the programs may be, for example, in a rural area, might be much more focused on, providing transportation resources, whereas in Baltimore, for example, we're focused on more urban issues, so housing, of course, transportation too, but not as heavily as maybe for a rural organization. So I think that's one misconception. I also, when we go to recruit for our own staff, people think, oh, well, they go work for a nonprofit, they must not be really smart people, or, and I think that's something that is always makes me laugh because, we're just like any other for-profit corporation. But we just, instead of having shareholders, our community is our shareholder, and we're helping people in the community, whereas, we're not, giving profits back to our shareholders. So it's just a different perspective and way to look at how our operations differ. But that's one thing always people get confused about. And then I think the other thing that people get confused about is, they see these, Time Magazine or National Geographic shows like the Indian Ocean, and they're showing all this clothing in the Indian Ocean, when in fact, and they think that's all Goodwill stuff, and it's not. We are responsibly, looking to work only with our salvage vendors that are, having second markets for it and third markets and so forth. So again, it goes back to the environmental piece that we were talking about earlier. We really want to show the world that we are a solid nonprofit, helping the community with workforce development, but also being stewards of the donations we get and reusing and repurposing as much as we can to keep things out of the landfills and trash disposal, so we can keep it going, keep it being reused in other products, other goods as much as possible. So it always has a life.
What I find quite interesting is how it relates to food. And the reason why I mention that is over, let's just say that the life of food, you have things that would be bought at supermarkets, then you would have things that are donated, then you would have food banks and charities where things that could have a life elsewhere or given a life elsewhere, and there ends up being not very much at the end, as in by having all these different avenues and different streams that food could go down, there ends up being so much less at the end that actually ends up at landfill or in rivers and seas and oceans of it just kind of contributing to other negative things as well. Is that possible with clothing, do you think? It sounds like we're discussing at least two or three little avenues that clothing could go down. Is that a world that you think is possible where there ends up being a zero sum situation? So nothing actually ends up going to landfill and contributing to things like global warming, climate change, that sort of thing. Do you think that's possible?
Do, although I do worry about, as I started the interview off talking about nylon. Nylon is not a really great, friendly material to repurpose. Hopefully there'll be something that gets created to be able to repurpose it. But for all the other textiles, absolutely, I think that this is very possible. And then as I mentioned, we're already seeing in Europe, several companies are investing in the technology to be able to do this because they too see that there's going to be legislation around it, that there's going to be a need, and our consumers are going to demand it, that we be more responsible with how we're getting rid of stuff.
I wonder why nylon is a problem. Is it the way that the material is, or is it simply because we've not necessarily got the technology to break it down yet?
I think probably a little of both. I know that there is one company though that's working to collect polyester, and polyester is being reused in oil, petroleum, and so that can be broken down, but it's really expensive. The equipment and technology to do this is a huge investment, and some of these companies are spending literally millions of dollars in this kind of equipment. So it's going to be expensive, but it's definitely possible. Definitely, I think that's the way I think that it'll be heading in the next, 10, maybe even fewer years. But as soon as that technology gets ramped up and gets more popular and people start learning about it, they're going to demand it. And then there could be some government regulation around it too, demanding that manufacturers of apparel do a certain amount of recycling of their goods. And there are some programs out there now that are making all kind of promotions around, when you buy a new pair of jeans, bring your old ones back in. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're repurposing it. They may be, repurposing it in their own goods, or they may be selling it for salvage like we do. A lot more companies are getting more proactive with that and taking back their label. And also they just don't want their label showing up in a landfill or in an ocean or sea because it's really bad branding for them. So they're very protective of where their garments go downstream. Of course, they can't control all of that, but if they can get someone who comes in and is loyal to their brand and wants to trade in, a pair of jeans or what have you, and then that can be repurposed. I mean, that is, a triple bottom line for the organization, that corporation.
What I'd be quite curious about is how customers are being made aware of what happens. So if you think of the idea of, let's just say, a company's logo ending up in the ocean somewhere, are customers becoming more aware of that, do you think? And that's what's causing the buying habits to change? Or do you think people are simply not necessarily aware of it? How do you think about it?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think the younger generations are much more attuned to socially responsible corporations than any other previous generations. The younger folks are definitely, they'll do research before they donate money, but they're also much more environmentally conscious about clothing, and they're not, some of my daughter is 24 and she buys all her clothes at Goodwill secondhand because she's thrifty and she wants to save her money, but she also doesn't see a need to go buy brand new if she can go to a thrift store and get something that's pretty decent and that's practical. And she's doing something for the social good by donating or shopping at Goodwill, but also she knows that when she's done with it, she'll donate it back to us and we'll handle it responsibly. But I think, that is changing a lot. These new demographics are much more socially responsible and are paying attention to companies. And you've seen it in the media. There's been all kind of boycotts and all kinds of things against different corporations for different reasons. So I think there's a lot more, there's a bigger magnifying glass on how companies are acting, what they're doing in their business that's responsible to the environment or the culture. And so I think that's definitely changing buying habits as well as obviously donating because people see that as a benefit by donating to Goodwill, that they're creating another life for whatever they're donating, and then it's going to be reused or repurposed in a responsible way. So I think that in short, this generation and future generations beyond them, because we've all heard these statistics that future generations are not going to be as wealthy as the baby boomers generations or Gen X's, and so they're going to be a lot more practical and needing to know how they can stretch their dollars the most. So I think it's all good for organizations like Goodwill that are, secondhand sellers of textiles and household goods.
I wonder if there's a way someone that would like to have a bit more confidence that the clothing isn't ending up in the wrong places. How would you suppose the consumers are able to find out? Is it they're able to actually see some of the material that ends up being reused and repurposed? How do you suppose that they're able to do that? And then if customers are then being more informed and wanting clothing that is a bit more sustainable, that then you're able to fulfill that need for sustainability as well?
Yeah, I think these are great questions. I think it's going to take time, but I think part of it is also about promotion. And I didn't talk about this, but we have a partnership with Trex, which is a company that makes composite decking. And so we collect donations, and usually they always come in a plastic trash bag, the big lawn and garden kind of trash bag, black trash bags. We get a ton of them. And so we have created a partnership with Trex because Trex uses thin plastics in the manufacture of their decking. They melt it down and then repurpose it with wood particle to make the outside decking. So we have begun collecting plastic trash bags in all of our stores. And then we even have receptacles in the front of the stores to collect plastic bags. They're banned in a lot of our area when you go to the grocery store, but they're not completely out of circulation. And some stores will just charge you, 10 cents for a plastic bag. So we're taking all that plastic and we're baling it for Trex to use in their decking. Now, one of the things that we, rely on is that Trex is going to promote, Goodwill when they're marketing their products. That's one thing that we would hope they would do because, that would, I think, incentivize people to look for companies that are doing that kind of innovative recycling. So I think it's going to be a lot more promotions needed. And we just aren't Coca-Cola. We just don't have a Coca-Cola budget. to go out and tell the world all the great things that we're doing. But it's really all about education and awareness.
Yeah, I think as well, if you think of in an ideal world, customers contribute to companies that are doing good. So I guess
Absolutely.
that's kind of the ideal space, isn't it? If the customers want to do right by the planet, then they should then choose companies that are doing right by the planet as well.
Exactly. Exactly.
So I suppose in some ways, the more you're able to show it, the more benefit that you're able to get out of it as well. In a case of, if you're having a hard time being able to market it, having a hard time being able to show it, then the customers simply won't be aware of it.
Yeah, exactly. And we try to do a lot of promotion on our donation receipts. Did you know that we, yada, yada, yada. But what's interesting is that when people donate to us, we've asked the question, we've done a lot of studies with our donors, and we ask them, did you choose to donate to Goodwill today because of our mission or because we were just on your way to work? And, by and large, most people say, oh, well, this, your donation site is on my way while I was out running errands, and they aren't really educated very much about our mission. And so it's kind of a chicken and the egg. We have to figure out ways that we can educate people about our mission if we are just a convenience, and then to build their loyalty over time so that they choose and maybe they move and then there's another location that's maybe not quite as convenient, but they would choose to go out of their way to donate to us because of the mission.
In some ways, it's creating this environment where they are contributing to a circular economy that's sustainable versus something else.
Exactly. Yep. And that's really in a nutshell, that's our whole mission. If you think about it, it's a big kind of circle of what happens to the donation, what happens to the revenue, what happens to the product downstream, and to change someone's life and get them a job. It really is a circular process.
That's the thing that I find quite fascinating as well, because if you think of the reduced impact on the environment, is there a way the clothing's better because it's better for the environment?
There are a lot of brands out there now. If you go into Harrods, there's a lot of higher end brands that are starting to label their items, blouse or sweater or whatever, and it said this product is made with, 20% of recycled material. So I think the change is coming, but it's going to take some time. And I don't know if I'd be curious to find out if those companies have any market data on whether or not, that tag influenced them to buy that particular item or not, or whether they, purchased it because they liked it and, it fit and it's a really nice blouse. I'd be curious to find out because I have seen that in numerous brands that are now even some of the denim companies are recycling denim in when they make new denim. And they'll have a tag on the inside of their clothing or even on the outside, and they'll say this, this garment was made with, whatever percentage. So I think it'll be interesting through the years and in the upcoming years, what's going to change, if that's going to be a meaningful part of influencing shopper behavior or not. I think it will, because I think that nobody wants to be wasteful. I don't think any of us want to on purpose, be wasteful. I mean, none of us are independently wealthy, or not many of us are anyway. So we're not just gonna, purchase something to throw it away. But I do think that it will influence shopper behavior, especially this younger generation. Like when they get into an income bracket where they can afford the higher quality items, I think they're going to go directly to an item that says it's been made with recycled material before they go with one that's not. Just because I think their thinking is very different from past generations about that. Not that past generations wouldn't care, but it's less of a stretch because the younger generation is they're just very different. They're very socially responsible. They're very concerned about issues and very concerned about, the environment, much more so than, say, my generation.
Yeah, I guess in some ways, is it the customer wanting to do good, or is it the company wanting to do good?
I think the company is going to be driven by the consumer, and the consumer is going to demand that companies use more repurposed items and recycle and keep stuff out of the landfill as much as possible. Again, I just think it's a generational thing, and that's there's the tide is coming, not here yet, but the tides are changing.
That's a very good point, Lisa. How can people connect with Goodwill and get involved with the work that you're up to?
As I mentioned, there are Goodwills all over the country here, and all of us do workforce development. So you can go on to, Google Goodwill, and there is a goodwill.org site where you can just type in your zip code, your parcel code, and that the Goodwill where you're located will come up. And you can reach out to them. There are lots of ways to get involved with Goodwill. We do a lot of, we bring in folks from other companies to do mock job interviews to help give people experience on how to do job interviews and how to respond to questions like you were mentioning. What if I have a criminal background? How do I explain that to an employer that I just made a mistake and I'm completely rehabilitated now, and that kind of stuff. So we have folks that volunteer and do a lot of interviewing. And we also have events where we have, for example, in Baltimore, right before Thanksgiving, we feed about 3,000 people at our convention center. But part of that, how that ties into our mission, is that we have a resource fair. So all the things that I mentioned earlier about substance abuse or transportation or food instability, those kind of issues, we have partners, community partners that we bring in for the day, and right outside of our dinner as a fair that has those resources that people can connect with. And then they can also seek our services as well at Goodwill.
Thanks so much for being a guest on the show. Those that are listening, feel free to subscribe, share the show, tell others, and also leave a review wherever you are listening into your podcasts. Lisa, thanks so much for taking the time. It's been great, and I look forward to keeping in touch. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me on.